He stopped for coffee. What he got was a second chance at the life he never knew he lost. Lucas Whitmore, a reclusive millionaire tech CEO burned out by success, pulls off a quiet highway into a forgotten town, just a quick break, nothing more. But inside the dusty Driftwood Diner, he's greeted not by a waitress, but by a barefoot little girl with bright eyes and a face that feels too familiar. Why does she speak to him like she knows him? Why does her mother, the woman behind the counter, go pale when she hears his name? What secret was buried 6 years ago? And why does this tiny cafe feel more like home than any high-rise ever did? This is not just a story about missed chances. It's about what we do when fate hands us a second one. About quiet strength, forgiveness, and the unshakable bond between a father, a daughter, and the woman who once walked away. If you're ready to feel deeply, cry honestly, and believe in the slow rebuild of love, then stay with us. Like, share, and subscribe to the channel, because this is a story you won't forget. The road was straight for miles, a ribbon of cracked asphalt slicing through Montana's late autumn stillness. Lucas Whitmore had no idea how long he'd been driving. He hadn't planned to go anywhere, hadn't packed a bag or sent a text. 1 minute. He'd been staring at a quarterly earnings report in his office on the 42nd floor. The next, he was gripping the steering wheel, tearing down the highway like he was running from a fire only he could feel. The silence inside the car was thick, save for the faint hum of tires and the occasional whisper of wind against the glass. His phone buzzed in the passenger seat every few minutes, vibrating against the leather. He ignored it. He had no interest in another meeting, another crisis, another investor call lined up back to back. For the first time in years, Lucas just left. No assistant, no security detail, no plan. Just the open road and something broken inside him he hadn't yet named. He passed a cluster of shuttered antique stores, the remnants of a once bustling roadside town that now looked like it had forgotten how to breathe. The sky above was overcast, dipped in dull gray, but Lucas didn't notice. He just drove, one hand on the wheel, the other absently resting on his jaw as he blinked slower than usual. He was tired, not the kind of tired sleep could fix. It was the exhaustion that came from being everything to everyone and nothing to himself. At 38. Lucas Whitmore was the face of innovation. The media called him a disruptor, a visionary, the man who'd turned a scrappy startup into a tech empire spanning 3 continents. But lately, none of it had felt real. None of it had felt his. He didn't know when it happened exactly. Maybe it was that charity gala where people kept congratulating him on achievements he didn't even remember striving for. Maybe it was the realization that he hadn't eaten a home-cooked meal in over a year. Or maybe it was that quiet moment 3 days ago, standing alone in his penthouse with the city lights stretched beneath him, realizing that he had everything but no one. So when his chest tightened on that video call earlier today, when the words on the screen blurred and his assistant's voice faded, he didn't fight it. He stood up, walked out, and drove. Now, hours later, hunger gnawed at his stomach and a dull ache settled into his spine. He slowed as he approached a small green road sign, Fair Hollow, Exit 6. Fair Hollow. He remembered it. A nowhere town tucked between wheat fields and pine, with no stoplights and only one gas station that still had a payphone mounted to the side. He hadn't thought of it in years. Not since. He shook the memory off like dust. Just past the exit ramp, Lucas spotted a tiny building with peeling red paint and a crooked sign that read the Driftwood Diner. A single car sat out front, half covered in dust. The windows were fogged from the inside, like the building was exhaling slowly after too many long days. It was the kind of place he would have driven past without a second glance, but this time he turned in. The gravel crunched under his tires as he parked. The engine clicked when he shut it off, and for a moment he just sat there, hands on the wheel, staring through the windshield. He didn't know what pulled him in. Maybe it was the quiet. Maybe it was the ghost of something he hadn't dealt with. Maybe it was nothing at all. He stepped out of the car and zipped his coat against the cold. The air smelled of earth and something faintly sweet. Apples, maybe, or cinnamon, the kind of scent that made your throat tighten with nostalgia you couldn't quite place. Lucas pushed the door open, half expecting a bell to chime overhead, but there was no sound, no music, no clatter of dishes or low conversation, just warmth, stillness. He took 2 steps inside. The place looked frozen in time booths with worn upholstery, menus written in chalk on a board above the counter, and a pie display with smudged glass. Sunlight filtered through streaky windows, casting long, gold-tinted shadows across the floor. He opened his mouth to call out, but hesitated. Then, quietly, a voice spoke. "You look tired." Lucas turned. Standing near the counter, holding a small notepad in her hands, was a little girl. She couldn't have been older than 6. Her brown hair was tucked into a low, messy ponytail. She wore an oversized red apron that nearly touched the floor, tied awkwardly over a plain white shirt and jeans that were too short for her growing legs. She looked at him with big, steady eyes, unblinking, serious, like she'd seen grown-ups come and go, like she wasn't surprised he was there. He blinked. "Are you the waitress?" he asked, gently. She nodded. "Mom's in the kitchen. I help." He glanced around again, still half expecting an adult to appear, laughing, explaining the whole thing was a quirky marketing gimmick. But no one came. Just the girl, standing there, quiet, sure of herself in a way that made him feel like he was the one out of place. She lifted the notepad. "What would you like?" Mr. Lucas let out a soft breath, the kind you don't realize you've been holding until it's gone. He sat down slowly at the nearest booth, fingers brushing the laminated table. "Coffee," he said. "Just coffee." The girl nodded. "We have muffins, too. Blueberry and banana nut. They're still warm." He smiled, something cracking gently in his chest. "Blueberry," he said. She scribbled something down, then turned and disappeared behind the counter like it was the most normal thing in the world. Lucas leaned back in the booth and looked around again. He had no idea what he'd just walked into, but somehow it felt like something in his life had finally shifted, and he hadn't even taken a sip yet. Lucas sat in the booth, fingers lightly tapping the edge of the table. The silence inside the Driftwood Diner was not uncomfortable, it was curious, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Outside, the wind picked up, nudging dry leaves against the window pane. The clouds had deepened, casting a moody filter across the room. Lucas glanced toward the kitchen door, half expecting the little girl to return with someone older, a mother, an aunt, someone, but instead she returned alone, carrying a tray that wobbled slightly in her small hands. On it sat a steaming mug of black coffee and a plate with one golden blueberry muffin. The plate was chipped at the rim. The napkin was folded with surprising care. Lucas stood instinctively to help her, but she shook her head. "I got it," she said softly. He sat back down, watching as she placed the mug and the plate gently on the table. The coffee smelled stronger than anything he'd had in months, earthy, slightly burnt and oddly comforting. The muffin radiated warmth. The girl looked at him with a calm that didn't belong on someone her age. "Is it okay?" she asked. Lucas nodded. "It's perfect." She gave a single satisfied nod and turned to walk away. But something in him stopped her. "What's your name?" he asked. She turned back. "Ellie, Ellie," he repeated. The name felt strange on his tongue. Familiar, but not because he'd heard it before. More like something he'd forgotten and only just remembered. "How old are you?" "Ellie, 6, she said quickly, then held up her fingers just in case he didn't believe her. "Almost 7. In February." "Wow," he replied with a faint smile. "That's a big age." She nodded solemnly. "Bigger than 6. Lucas chuckled. "I can't argue with that." Ellie lingered for a second longer, then pointed to a jar by the window ledge. "You can have more coffee if you want. Mom says refills are free unless you're rude." He raised an eyebrow. "Am I rude?" "Not yet," she said, completely serious, then disappeared through the swinging kitchen door again. Lucas let out a low breath and leaned forward. He took a sip. The coffee was bitter, slightly overbrewed, and perfect. It tasted like memory, like the kind of diner coffee he used to drink in high school when he stayed up too late, dreaming of futures he thought he wanted. He looked around the diner again. It was quiet but cared for. Someone had swept the floors recently. The napkin holders were full. There were coloring books stacked near the window with half-broken crayons in a plastic tub. He noticed the small details, the kind of things that didn't belong in an abandoned roadside shop. No, this place wasn't forgotten. It was simply tired. As he took another sip, the kitchen door swung open again. But this time, it wasn't Ellie. The woman who stepped out was wiping her hands on a towel, a smear of flour across one cheek. She wore a faded apron over jeans and a navy blue sweater. Her hair was pulled up into a loose knot, a few strands falling around her face. Her movements were tired, practiced. Lucas didn't move, and then she looked up, her eyes met his, and the room stopped breathing. Claire. The name dropped into his mind like a stone. She froze. The towel slipped slightly from her fingers. Her breath hitched. "Lucas," she said, not loud, not shocked, just his name, like tasting it again after a long time. He stood slowly, hands resting on the back of the booth for balance. "Claire." The word barely made it out of his mouth. 6 years. Maybe a little more. The last time he saw her was at a one-bedroom apartment just outside Seattle. She'd been standing in the doorway in a soft gray hoodie, telling him it was okay, telling him to go, that she understood. He remembered the look on her face. It wasn't anger. It was something worse, something quieter, like she already knew goodbye was permanent, even if he hadn't figured that out yet. And now, here she was, 10 feet away, older, yes, but not faded, just different, firmer somehow, like life had sculpted her edges sharper than before. Claire blinked, once, then stepped forward carefully. "I didn't recognize the car," she said. "Didn't expect." Her voice faltered. "Anyone." Lucas tried to find his voice, but everything inside him felt too loud to speak. His chest ached like something old and locked away had been rattled open too quickly. "I was just driving," he finally said. "I didn't even know where I was going. I saw the diner and I stopped." Claire gave a tight nod, like the information had weight but no direction. She glanced toward the kitchen where Ellie had vanished, and then it clicked. Lucas's heart stuttered. He looked at Claire, then back at the door. "The girl, Ellie, is she—" Claire held his gaze for a beat longer than necessary. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Yes," she said. "She's mine." Lucas felt the air go thin. He tried to speak, but his lips parted and no words followed. Claire looked away, then back. Her voice had steadied now, like she'd had years to rehearse this moment. "She's yours, too." Everything inside him recoiled, not from the child, but from himself. He sat down hard, the booth creaking beneath him. His hand trembled slightly as he picked up the coffee cup and set it back down. He stared at the surface of the drink like it might offer some kind of answer. I didn't know," he whispered. "I didn't, Claire. I would have." She raised a hand, stopping him without force. "I tried. Once," she said. "You'd already changed your number. I didn't have your email anymore. You'd disappeared." His throat tightened. "You could have." She gave a bitter smile. "What chased you to a city I couldn't afford to fly to written letters to a company you hadn't even founded yet. I was scared. I was angry. And then," she shrugged, "then I decided maybe you didn't need to know." Lucas looked up at her. "But I did." Claire folded her arms. "Now you do." The silence that followed was so thick he could feel it between his ribs. She didn't say it with cruelty, just finality, as if the years that passed had written their own explanation and she no longer owed him a full sentence. He tried to remember how to breathe. "I don't even know what to say," he admitted. She softened then, just slightly. "I didn't expect you to walk through that door," she said. "I didn't expect you at all." Lucas nodded slowly. Then he looked again toward the kitchen, where Ellie's small frame had vanished behind swinging doors like it was nothing. But it was everything. He had missed it all. First steps, first words, first birthdays. A weight pressed into his chest, thick and unforgiving. When he looked back at Claire, his eyes were wet but steady. "Can I stay?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. She just watched him, long and quiet. Finally, she said, "That's not a question for me anymore," and walked back into the kitchen. Lucas sat alone, the coffee now lukewarm in front of him, and for the first time in years, he felt completely, utterly unsure of everything. Lucas didn't move for a long time. The air inside the Driftwood Diner had shifted. It was warmer than before, heavier, like the walls themselves had soaked up all the tension and were quietly holding it in place. He stared at the kitchen door long after Claire disappeared behind it, unsure if he was welcome, unsure if he should stay. But he didn't get up. The coffee was cold now, but he drank it anyway. Bitterness grounded him, something sharp and real to hold on to. His mind was spinning, trying to attach meaning to the moment, trying to catch up to the truth that had landed so suddenly in his lap. "She's yours too." 5 words. Just 5. But they cracked the world in 2. Ellie. Her name looped through his mind, softly but insistently. Her steady brown eyes, the way she had said refills were free unless you were rude. Her hands balancing the tray with more care than any 6-year-old should ever have to learn. And she was his. Lucas leaned forward, elbows on the table, hands folded like he was about to pray. He didn't know who to ask for forgiveness. Claire, the child in the back, himself. He closed his eyes. 6 years. Almost 7. How did you miss a whole lifetime? He remembered that final conversation with Claire as if it had happened yesterday. They were standing in a parking lot outside her apartment. She wore that old gray hoodie, sleeves pulled over her hands, trying to be brave. He was already thinking about Seattle, about funding rounds, about making something of himself before he had nothing left to offer. He'd told her he loved her. He just hadn't stayed. There hadn't been a big fight, no slammed doors or ultimatums, only the slow bleed of silence that followed him onto the plane and chased him into his new life. And then, like most unfinished things, it had been packed into the back of his mind, filed under regret, and never truly dealt with, until now. Lucas stood and walked slowly to the counter. Behind it, a pie sat in a glass case. The handwritten sign taped to the front read Apple Crumble, $3. It was faded, like it had been reused more than once. Next to the register was a sketch pad, open to a page filled with crayon scribbles. A house with smoke curling from the chimney, a little girl with stick arms and a red dress, a woman standing beside her, and a third figure, taller, with no face drawn in. Lucas's throat tightened. He turned as the kitchen door opened again. Claire stepped out with a towel slung over her shoulder. She stopped when she saw him at the counter but said nothing. She walked over to the sink behind the register and began rinsing out a mug. He waited a few seconds, then spoke. "I didn't come here looking for you." She didn't turn around. I figured. I didn't even know where I was driving. She placed the mug on the drying rack, still not facing him, and yet, here you are. Lucas nodded slowly. "Yeah, here I am." She finally turned. There was no anger in her eyes, not exactly, but there was something firmer, a quiet wall built from years of figuring things out on her own. She wiped her hands on her apron and met his gaze. "You don't get to walk in here and be surprised," she said. "You don't get to look at her like she's a miracle and forget the years it took to raise her." "I'm not trying to forget anything," he replied gently. Claire's voice stayed even. "You already forgot." Lucas felt the sting of that. He didn't argue. He couldn't. She moved toward the back of the counter and leaned against it, arms crossed loosely, more out of self-protection than hostility. The fluorescent light above flickered once and then steadied. He watched her for a long moment. She's amazing," he said, barely above a whisper. Claire gave a soft snort that could have been agreement or disbelief. "She's curious, kind, smarter than I know what to do with some days," she said, "and she's stubborn as hell. Wonder where she got that." Lucas offered a ghost of a smile. "She looks like you." Claire shook her head. "She looks like you. Same eyes, same jaw. She even holds her spoon with her left hand like you used to." That landed hard, not because it was a compliment, but because it meant Claire had noticed, had been carrying his absence in every small gesture their daughter made. Lucas sat back down at the booth. His voice came low, quiet. "I missed everything." Claire didn't answer. "I didn't know," he continued, "and that doesn't make it better. But it's the truth. I didn't know. I believe you," she said simply. He looked up, surprised. She wasn't trying to punish him, not in the way he'd feared, but her trust was buried deep, under layers of responsibility and fatigue. "I just don't know what you expect now," she said. "You show up, You find out you have a kid, and then what? Lucas hesitated. He didn't have a prepared speech. He hadn't thought that far ahead. All he knew was that something had cracked open the moment Ellie said her name, and he couldn't go back to the man he was 2 hours ago. I don't know what happens next, he admitted. I only know I want to be here, not just now, not just for today. I want to know her. I want her to know me, if that's even possible. Claire studied him. She doesn't understand what disappointment feels like, she said. Not yet. I've spent 6 years trying to keep it from her. If you come into her life, even a little, and then disappear, I won't. She gave a slow, tired smile. Don't say that unless you're sure. I'm not sure about anything, he said, except that I don't want to run anymore. Claire's eyes softened. For a moment, neither of them spoke. In the back, Ellie's laughter rang out. The sound was light, full of something Lucas hadn't heard in a long time, freedom. Claire looked toward the kitchen. She thinks you're just a customer, she said. She has no idea who you are. Lucas nodded. Do you want me to tell her? Not today. He agreed. He wasn't ready either. Claire moved to the coffee machine and poured a fresh cup. She placed it in front of him without ceremony. I'll let you stay for lunch, she said, but not because you're owed anything, only because she liked talking to you. Lucas accepted the mug, humbled. Thank you. Claire tilted her head. Don't thank me yet, she said. She's going to ask who you are. Kids always ask. Lucas sipped the coffee. Then I'll tell her the truth, he said. As much as she's ready to hear. Claire leaned back, watching him carefully. Okay, she said. Let's see if you mean it. She turned and disappeared behind the kitchen door again, leaving Lucas at the table, holding a warm mug in his hands and the beginnings of something he couldn't yet name rising in his chest. He didn't know what he was doing, but for the first time in years, he was exactly where he needed to be. Lucas didn't touch his food. Claire had brought out 2 bowls of soup and a plate of cornbread, setting them down without a word. He had murmured a thank you, but the words stuck in his throat. Now he sat across from her in the booth, both hands wrapped around the warm ceramic, staring down into the steam like it might show him something he couldn't yet face. Claire ate slowly, spoon scraping the side of her bowl every now and then, careful not to look at him too long. The clink of silverware and the hum of the old refrigerator behind the counter were the only sounds between them. Outside, the light was beginning to shift. That golden late-afternoon glow had started to soften, stretching shadows across the floor. Lucas finally cleared his throat. I should have called, he said. Claire didn't look up. He tried again. Back then, I should have written something. She let her spoon rest on the edge of the bowl. Her voice was steady. You didn't. He nodded slowly. I told myself you were better off, that if I reached out, I'd only make it harder for you. Claire gave a short, dry laugh, and somehow, not reaching out made it easier Lucas didn't respond. There was no defense for it. He had walked away from their small apartment with the belief that success would justify the silence, that if he built something great, made something of himself, he could circle back and fix it all later, but he never circled back. Not until today. She took a sip of water and leaned back. You know, she said, I used to imagine what I'd say if I ever saw you again. In my head. I yelled, I threw things, I slammed doors, and now he asked carefully. Now, she said, I'm just tired. Lucas looked at her then, really looked. She was still the same woman he had fallen for, sharp-witted, steady-hearted, but there were new lines around her eyes now, not from age, but from effort, from caring too much for too long. "I'm sorry," he said. Claire's eyes didn't soften. Sorry doesn't help with diapers or doctor visits or the night she cried and I didn't know why. "I missed it all," he said quietly. "Yes, you did." Lucas nodded again, letting the weight of it settle. He wasn't looking for forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe not ever. What he wanted, more than anything, was understanding. A place to begin again, even if it wasn't at the start. "She ever ask about me?" he asked. Claire hesitated. "I told her dad was someone I loved a long time ago, that he had to go away. I never lied, Lucas. I just didn't give her someone to miss." He swallowed the knot in his throat. "Does she know my name?" Claire shook her head. "I didn't want it to be a shadow over her life. You weren't there, so I made peace with the fact that you might never be." He reached across the table, not to touch her, but to place his palm flat on the wood between them. "I don't want to be a shadow anymore." Claire looked at his hand, then at him. "You can't just show up once and think that's enough." "I know. You can't walk back in and expect her to welcome you like it's natural." "I don't." Claire leaned in, elbows on the table, eyes steady and sharp. "Then what do you want?" "Lucas, really, what do you want?" The question settled hard in his chest. He thought about the boardrooms, the press releases, the strategic planning meetings that had once made him feel powerful. He thought about the hollow victories, the empty apartments, the nights he went home to silence. He thought about the way Ellie had looked at him with curiosity instead of fear, the way her small voice had filled the room with something that felt like light. "I want to try," he said. "I want to learn who she is. I want her to know who I am. Even if it takes time, even if I have to earn every second." Claire said nothing. "I'm not here to take her away from you. I would never do that. I just—" He paused, then continued, his voice softer. "I just want to be part of something real." She studied him, and for the first time since he walked in, her posture shifted slightly, her shoulders lowered, her jaw unclenched. It wasn't an invitation, but it wasn't resistance either. "She's been asking lately," Claire said, "about fathers, why some kids have one and she doesn't. I tell her families look different for everyone. That love doesn't always come in the same shape." Lucas leaned in. "I want to be that shape for her. If you'll let me." Claire looked out the window. The wind had picked up. Leaves swirled across the parking lot, dancing in spirals, caught between letting go and landing. "I'll be honest with you," she said. "I built this life on the assumption you weren't coming back. I worked nights, cleaned motel rooms, saved every penny I could until I bought this place. Not because I had some big dream of running a diner, but because it was stable, it gave her a home." Lucas listened in silence. "There were days I resented you," she admitted. "Nights I looked at her and wondered why I had to do it all alone. But then she'd smile, or fall asleep on my chest, and suddenly, it didn't matter anymore. I didn't know," he whispered. She looked back at him. "You didn't try to." He nodded. "You're right." Another pause stretched between them. Not cold, just full. Then Claire sighed. "She likes you," she said. "Ellie, she said you're the only customer who asked her name today." Lucas smiled faintly. "That makes me her favorite. For today, I'll take that." Claire picked up her bowl and stood. "I'm not making promises," she said. but I'm also not closing the door." Lucas looked up at her. "That's all I'm asking." She took both bowls and turned toward the kitchen. At the last second, she paused. "She's in the back, coloring. If you want to sit with her, you can." Lucas nodded, standing slowly. "Thanks," he said. Claire didn't respond. She just pushed the door open with her back and disappeared behind it. Lucas made his way toward the corner of the diner where Ellie had stacked crayons and papers into neat piles. She looked up when he approached, her face lighting up. "Did you eat your muffin I did? Did you like it? I loved it. Want to draw with me?" He sat down on the floor beside her. "I'd like that." As she handed him a crayon and began explaining the rules of her imaginary world, Lucas felt something shift, not fixed, not healed, but beginning. The years they lost could never come back, but maybe, just maybe, they could build something out of what remained. "Thanks," Lucas said again, quieter this time. Ellie returned to her drawing, tongue poking out slightly at the corner of her mouth as she colored in the grass. Lucas watched her in silence for a moment. It struck him how easily she existed, how fully present she was in this small, uneven corner of the world. No filters, no overthinking, just crayons and paper and belief in things like talking moons and green skies. He wanted to ask her 1,000 things. What her favorite color was today, whether she liked music, what scared her, what made her laugh, but he didn't want to rush it. This wasn't a meeting with a potential partner or a negotiation over terms. This was his daughter, and she didn't owe him anything. "Do you work?" she asked, glancing up. "I do," Lucas said. "I run a company." What kind of company, he thought for a moment, then smiled. "Computers and ideas?" "That's boring," she said, nodding as if confirming a theory. He laughed. "You're probably right. Mommy says work is something grown-ups do to buy groceries." "She's not wrong," he said. She kept coloring, eyes serious. "Do you like groceries?" Lucas chuckled again. "I do. Especially apples." "Me too," she said. "I like the ones that are red with a little yellow. They're sweeter. I'll remember that." She looked up at him again, something new flickering in her expression. A question she hadn't decided whether or not to ask. Her eyes were wide and steady, and for a second, Lucas could swear he saw Claire in them sharpness behind the softness. "Do you know my mom?" she asked. Lucas blinked. He nodded slowly. "A long time ago." Ellie frowned. "Was it when you were little?" "Not quite. I was a little older, but she was very important to me." "She still is," Ellie said simply. Lucas's heart skipped. "Yeah," he said, "she is." The kitchen door swung open and Claire stepped out, holding a plate in one hand and a towel over her shoulder. She stopped when she saw them sitting on the floor together, then slowly walked over to their booth and set the plate down grilled cheese, cut in half, and a small bowl of sliced apples. She didn't interrupt. Ellie scrambled to her feet and ran over to the table. "Mommy," he said apples are his favorite too. Claire offered a small, non-committal smile. "Is that right?" Lucas stood more slowly, brushing his hands on his pants. "I appreciate lunch," he said. Claire nodded. "It's just grilled cheese." He looked at the plate. "Smells like a memory." Claire tilted her head. "You always were poetic when you didn't know what to say." Lucas didn't argue. He watched as Ellie picked up her sandwich with both hands, took a huge bite, and smiled like it was the best thing in the world. It probably was. Not because of the taste, but because of the setting. A safe booth, a quiet diner, her mother close. A strange man who, for reasons she couldn't explain, made her feel special just by sitting on the floor and coloring with her. Lucas sat across from her again and reached for a slice of apple. Claire remained behind the counter, wiping something that didn't need wiping. Her movements were practiced, efficient, but her eyes kept drifting toward the table. "Do you live far?" Ellie asked, mid-chew. Lucas hesitated. "Far enough, like another town." He nodded. "Yes, a big city, lots of cars, lots of buildings." She wrinkled her nose. "Sounds noisy." "It is. Do you like it?" He thought for a moment. "I used to. Not anymore, I think." He paused. "I think I forgot what quiet feels like." Ellie nodded, like that made perfect sense. "Quiet is nice. Yes, it is." She reached for her juice box and took a long sip. "Do you have a dog?" Lucas smiled. "No. Do you? Not yet. Mommy says maybe when I'm 8. "Why 8? She said it's when I can help clean up the poop." Lucas laughed before he could stop himself, the sound breaking something stiff in his chest. Ellie grinned proudly. "She says we don't get a dog unless someone promises to walk it, even in snow. That's fair." She looked at him, eyes narrowing. "Would you help walk it?" Lucas paused. "If your mom said yes," he said, "I'd help, even in snow." Ellie nodded, satisfied with the answer. Then she returned to her sandwich, humming quietly under her breath as she ate. Claire walked over after a few minutes and collected the empty plate. She didn't say much, but her eyes lingered on Lucas for a second longer than before. Not soft, but less guarded. "Thanks," he said again. She nodded and turned back toward the kitchen. As she passed, Ellie whispered, "He said yes to helping." Claire raised an eyebrow but didn't respond. Lucas leaned back in the booth, eyes following the curve of his daughter's face, the shape of her nose, the way she used both hands when she drank, the small scrape on her chin, all the tiny things he hadn't known, all the thousands more he had missed. He felt the ache again, not sharp, but deep, the kind that settles quietly in the chest and just stays there, a steady reminder. He didn't want to leave, not now, not when something inside him had started to realign. He didn't know what tomorrow looked like or what he was walking into, but he knew what he'd been walking away from, and now, seated across from Ellie in this forgotten café, he felt it fully for the first time. He'd been walking away from this, from her. The weight of it was staggering. Ellie wiped her hands on a napkin, then glanced toward the coloring corner. "Want to finish the moon picture?" Lucas smiled. "I'd love to." Claire's voice came from the counter. "Actually," she said gently, "it's probably time for you to rest a bit." Ellie pouted. "But I'm not tired." "You've been up since 6, Claire said, walking over and brushing a hand gently over her daughter's head. "And you promised we'd read that library book before nap." Ellie sighed dramatically, then slipped out of the booth. She turned to Lucas and waved. "You can come back tomorrow." Claire froze for half a second. Lucas looked at Claire before answering. "If it's okay," he said softly, "I'd really like that." Claire didn't respond right away. Then she looked down at Ellie. "Say goodbye nicely, honey." Ellie gave him a quick hug before skipping off toward the back, her footsteps light. Lucas stood and looked at Claire again. "I mean it," he said. "I'd like to come back." Claire crossed her arms, but her expression was unreadable. Then, "Come early," she said. "Sundays are slower. I will." She nodded, and for the first time, there was no trace of resistance in her voice. "Okay." As Lucas stepped out into the cool afternoon air, he didn't check his phone. He didn't look at the time. The sky above was still gray, but the world felt lighter somehow. The door clicked shut behind him, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man running from his life. He felt like a man beginning to return to it. Lucas arrived 10 minutes early. He hadn't slept well the night before, not because of stress, but because of something closer to anticipation. His apartment felt emptier than usual after he left the Driftwood Diner. The silence, which once felt like peace, now echoed with everything he didn't know about his daughter. Now. The sun had just begun to lift over the fields, and a soft breeze moved through the gravel lot. The diner looked the same as it had 2 days earlier. Faded red siding, windows still fogged from the inside, but this time it felt less like a coincidence and more like a destination. Before he reached the door, it opened. Ellie stood barefoot in a cartoon t-shirt and pajama pants patterned with little stars. Her hair stuck out wildly on one side, and a wide smile spread across her face as she looked up at him. "You came early," she said, stretching her arms wide like she'd been waiting hours just for him. "I couldn't wait," Lucas replied. She took his hand without hesitation and pulled him inside. The diner looked different, with the chairs still stacked and the lights dimmed low. It was softer somehow, quieter than quiet. A faint tune hummed from a small radio on the shelf, something old and warm, the kind of song you don't know the name of but feel like you've always known. Claire was in the kitchen, flipping something in a skillet. She turned when she heard the door and gave a brief nod toward Lucas. Her hair was pulled into a loose braid, a streak of flour across one cheek. "Mornin'," she said, calm and unguarded. "Smells amazing," Lucas replied. He wasn't sure whether to hug her or just stand still. So he chose stillness. Claire pointed to the table in the back, already set for 3, mismatched plates, chipped but charming, and mugs painted with faded flowers. It looked like a scene from someone else's life, one he'd never believed he could be part of. Ellie slid into her seat and beamed. "These are the special pancakes. Mommy put cinnamon and bananas in them, but only on Sundays." "Sounds like magic," Lucas said, taking the chair beside her. Claire brought over a plate stacked high with golden pancakes, followed by a small glass pitcher of syrup and a bowl of strawberries. Then she returned with orange juice, freshly squeezed. She didn't linger, just set the food down and sat across from them without ceremony. They ate slowly. Ellie talked in bursts about dreams she had, the way her friend at school always wore mismatched socks, and how she wanted to paint the moon pink one day, just to see if anyone would notice. Lucas listened, genuinely and attentively, laughing when she looked for a reaction and nodding when she simply wanted to be heard. Claire mostly observed. She answered when spoken to, smiled when Ellie said something particularly odd or clever, and every now and then her eyes found Lucas's across the table, not searching, just watching. "You have syrup on your cheek," Lucas said softly to Ellie. She giggled and tried to wipe it off with the back of her hand, only to smear it further. Claire handed her a napkin without a word. Ellie wiped harder this time, then turned back to her pancakes with fresh determination. Lucas couldn't stop smiling. It wasn't the food or the setting. It was the weight of being allowed to witness something so small, yet so sacred. The kind of Sunday morning that most people didn't think twice about. But to him, it was extraordinary. After breakfast, Ellie insisted he come see her drawing box again. He followed her to the corner near the window, where she'd spread out crayons, paper, stickers, and a small jar of buttons she called her idea starters. She handed him a sheet and pointed. "This time, you draw something first." Lucas blinked. "Me, yep, anything." He thought for a moment, then began sketching a tree. The shape was lopsided. The leaves were messy. But when he looked up, Ellie was watching with genuine interest. "That's a very squiggly tree," she said. "Thank you," Lucas replied. "No," she clarified. That wasn't a compliment. He laughed. Claire, leaning in the doorway of the kitchen, smiled quietly at the scene. She didn't interrupt, didn't hover. She just stood there, arms folded loosely, a warm cup of coffee in her hand. Lucas drew a sun next, and Ellie added tiny birds in the sky. They worked together in comfortable silence, only pausing when she leaned her head on his arm for a second, then sat up again like nothing happened. When Claire finally called her back to help fold napkins, Ellie jumped up, grabbed Lucas's hand, and pulled him to his feet. "You have to stay a little longer," she said. Lucas looked at Claire for permission. Her answer wasn't in words. She just turned toward the counter and pulled out a clean apron. She tossed it to him. "You can wipe down the pie display." Lucas smiled and slipped it over his head. They worked together in quiet rhythm. Claire restocked the mugs while Lucas cleaned glass cases and refilled the sugar containers. Ellie buzzed between them like a bee offering advice, dropping sprinkles on the floor, occasionally hugging someone's leg before disappearing again. There was no need to explain anything. It just worked. For the first time in years, Lucas felt like he was inside something, not observing, not pretending, not performing, but actually inside a moment, a life, a morning that didn't require perfection or apology. When the clock neared noon, Claire flipped the sign on the front door to open. The first customer came in 5 minutes later, a truck driver who sat at the corner booth and ordered the usual without needing to speak. Lucas stood behind the counter, hands awkwardly folded. Claire handed him a pencil and a notepad. "You want to try taking his order?" Lucas blinked. "Seriously," she shrugged. "You said you wanted to be here." He looked at the pencil, then back at her. "Do I get training?" "You'll be fine." She moved past him, brushing lightly against his shoulder as she passed. The contact wasn't accidental, but it wasn't an invitation either. Lucas nodded, took a deep breath, and walked over to the booth. The man looked up, surprised. "You knew sort of," Lucas said. "What can I get for you?" "Same as always." Lucas hesitated. "And that is?" The man grinned. "You'll learn." Lucas chuckled and wrote something illegible on the pad, then returned to the counter. Claire gave him a look. Not approval, not sarcasm, something else, something like trust. By the time Ellie had finished setting out the last napkin dispensers, the sun was high, and the diner was officially humming with low voices, clinks of silverware, and the smell of bacon and coffee. Lucas leaned against the counter and looked around. It wasn't grand. It wasn't dramatic, but it was real. And for him, it was more than enough. By the end of the second week, everyone in Fair Hollow knew Lucas's name. Not because he told them, not because he announced himself, but because small towns didn't need introductions. They noticed patterns, especially the kind that didn't belong, and a man like Lucas Whitmore, even without his tailored suits and boardroom presence, didn't blend in. He came every morning, sometimes before the diner opened, sometimes just after. Claire no longer hesitated to hand him a rag or ask him to refill the napkin holders. He never objected. In fact, he seemed to welcome it like every menial task was a small way to make up for the time he'd missed. He didn't talk about his job. He didn't take calls while he was there. His phone stayed in his coat pocket, untouched, even when it vibrated. His eyes instead stayed on Ellie. She was magnetic. Every day, she had a new story, a new imaginary friend, a new theory about the stars or why pancakes taste better on Sundays. Lucas listened to each one like it was gospel, nodding, questioning, sometimes taking notes on napkins when she asked him to remember something very important. Claire watched them often. She didn't always speak, but Lucas could feel her eyes when he helped Ellie wash her hands, or when he tied her shoelaces, even though she could already do it herself. There was a quiet calculation in Claire's gaze, not cold, not closed off, just protective. She was watching, not just for intention, but for consistency, for proof that this man wasn't just visiting out of guilt or novelty. Lucas understood. He didn't blame her. He simply kept showing up. One afternoon, when the diner was quiet, Claire handed him a to-do list written on the back of a receipt. It included things like replace the sugar jars, clean under the booths, and check the stockroom light. He took it with a quiet smile and didn't ask questions, while he was wiping down one of the corner tables. Ellie came running in from the kitchen holding a piece of paper above her head like a trophy. "I made something." He stopped immediately and knelt to her level. "Let's see." She unfolded it carefully. It was a drawing of 3 stick figures, one taller, with brown hair, one shorter, with a long braid, and one very small one in the middle. Above them, in crayon letters, it said, "My team." Lucas stared at it for a moment. "Is that us?" he asked. She nodded proudly. "Me, Mommy, and you?" He swallowed hard. "I love it." Claire, who had come around the corner just then, paused when she saw the paper. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes did. Something flickered there. Fear, maybe, or memory, or the delicate ache of watching your daughter claim someone who used to be a stranger. Lucas caught it. He stood slowly, still holding the drawing. "I'll hang this somewhere safe," he said gently. "Hang it on the fridge," Ellie insisted. Claire didn't object. Lucas did exactly that, using a weak magnet shaped like a donut. When Ellie returned to the kitchen to help stir batter, Lucas lingered at the counter. Claire was wiping something, as usual. The towel in her hand was damp, and her fingers moved in small, methodical circles across the stainless steel surface. "She made us a team," he said softly. Claire didn't look up. "She makes everyone a team." He paused, but she meant this one. Claire set the towel down. "Don't read too much into drawings." Lucas nodded once. "I'm not." She glanced at him then, and for a moment, her guard lowered just enough to show something more complicated underneath. "You're good with her," she said. Lucas blinked. "Thank you." Claire tilted her head. "She's trusting. Too trusting. Sometimes I wish she wasn't." He didn't take offense. "She reminds me of you," he said instead. Claire gave a short laugh. "That's not a compliment. It wasn't meant to be," he said with a smile, softening the words. She didn't smile back, but she didn't walk away either. "She's going to get attached," she said. "If you keep showing up, I want her to," he said. Claire looked at him. No games in her eyes. "And what happens when your world calls you back?" Lucas hesitated. "That's the first time you've asked me that," he said. It's the only question that matters." He looked down at the towel in her hand, then back at her. "I walked away once," he said, "out of fear, out of ambition, out of thinking I wasn't enough, but I'm not that person anymore. Maybe," Claire said, "or maybe this is just another version of him, one who's playing house until the novelty wears off." That stung, because part of it, if he were honest, was rooted in truth. He had a habit of escaping, building new things instead of fixing old ones. But he also knew what loneliness had taught him. He knew what quiet had stripped bare, and he knew that something inside him had shifted the moment Ellie handed him that muffin on day one. "I don't have all the right words," he said, "but I have time, and I have intention, and I'll prove it, if you let me." Claire said nothing, but her silence didn't feel like rejection this time. Later that afternoon, as Lucas was refilling the coffee machine, a local named Joe, an older man with a trucker hat and suspenders, walked in and gave him a once-over. "You're the guy who's been hanging around Claire's place," Joe said. Lucas nodded politely. "I suppose I am." Joe leaned on the counter. "You from here?" "No, just visiting for now." Joe muttered. "Funny thing about visitors, they don't usually stick around long." Lucas held his gaze. "I'm not a tourist." Joe grunted. "We'll see." Then he ordered a black coffee and sat near the window, whistling low under his breath. The words stayed with Lucas longer than they should have, not because of their sharpness, but because of the quiet doubt they unlocked. Would he stay? Could he? What would it cost him as he wiped down the counters that evening, after Ellie had fallen asleep curled up in the back room? He glanced out at the empty road through the glass door. He thought about the boardroom waiting for him, the deadlines, the obligations, the people who called him sir but didn't know anything about him, and then he looked at the drawing still pinned on the fridge. "My team," in a child's handwriting. It meant more than any title on his office door. He didn't need to decide everything today, but he knew one thing with certainty. He would be back tomorrow, again, and the day after. Because sometimes showing up wasn't about what you said. It was about who you chose to become, the moment it happened. Nobody noticed it at first, not even Lucas. They were at the park, the small one near the diner with the rusty jungle gym and a single squeaky swing. It was Saturday, late afternoon, and the air smelled faintly of wood smoke and dry grass. Lucas had offered to take Ellie out for an hour while Claire finished the inventory at the diner. It had become routine, him helping, Ellie cheering, Claire letting go a little more each time. They'd packed peanut butter crackers and juice boxes. Ellie brought her sketch pad. Lucas brought nothing but his phone, which he didn't check once. They played tag. She climbed up the jungle gym and shouted down weather reports like a miniature newscaster. Lucas clapped and booed on cue, pretending to panic when she yelled tornado warning. Then, after running in wide circles until she was breathless, Ellie flopped into the grass, arms spread wide. Lucas sat beside her. "Are you tired yet?" he asked. "Nope," she said, clearly tired. He chuckled. "Liar." She grinned and closed her eyes, cheeks flushed. "You're like the best dad ever." Lucas froze. His breath caught halfway between inhale and disbelief. He turned to look at her, but she was still lying back, eyes closed, smiling softly like she hadn't just shifted the earth beneath him. "What did you say?" She opened one eye. "I said, you're the best dad." She said it again, like it was a nickname, like it was normal. Like it had always been true. Lucas swallowed. I'm not. He started, then stopped himself. She sat up, brushing grass from her hair. Mommy said you used to be important to her. Lucas nodded slowly. I was. Are you important to me now? He didn't answer right away. He couldn't. She reached over and took his hand. I think so, she said. And that was it. That was the moment. That word Dad hung in the air like smoke, sweet, dangerous, real. Lucas walked her back to the diner in a strange silence. Ellie didn't seem to notice. She skipped ahead, pointing out birds and pretending cracks in the sidewalk were rivers they had to leap over. But Lucas, he felt like he was walking on a tightrope strung between hope and heartbreak. Claire was wiping the counter when they came in. Hey, Bug, she said. You have fun. Ellie ran straight to her, wrapping herself around Claire's waist. He's the best dad, she blurted out. Claire froze. Lucas didn't speak. He couldn't. His chest was still echoing. Claire looked at him. Not shocked, not angry, but something deeper. Something like fear. Ellie, honey, she said gently, pulling her daughter back to look at her. Where did you hear that I said it? Ellie said proudly. I made it up. Can I say it again? Claire glanced at Lucas, then back to Ellie. Her voice was soft, but firmer now. We don't use big words unless we know what they mean. Okay, I do know what it means, Ellie said, frowning. Lucas knelt beside her. It's okay, he said. Really. Claire stood up straight, pressing her lips together. Ellie, why don't you go wash up for dinner? The girl hesitated, clearly sensing something had shifted, but eventually obeyed. She disappeared into the back room. Lucas rose slowly. I didn't put that in her head. He said, I know, Claire replied. They stood in silence for a moment. She meant it. He added, I know. Claire crossed her arms, looking at the door Ellie had just gone through. She calls people what they feel like. She said, not what they are. Lucas stayed still. Is that so bad? It is if it's temporary. That word hit him harder than it should have. She's been drawing you into every picture, Claire continued, her voice quiet but firm. She hums when she knows you're coming. She checks the window when she thinks you're late. She used to do that with my father, too, before he left. Lucas blinked. Your father, Claire, didn't respond. She was staring at a point just past his shoulder. She's seen people leave. It doesn't matter if it's blood. What matters is who stays, and for how long. Lucas stepped closer. I'm not him. Claire looked up at him. You might not be, but if she calls you Dad now, she's not going to take that back. And if you leave later, she won't understand. She'll think she did something wrong. Her voice cracked a little. She hated it, hated showing that soft place, but it slipped through anyway. Lucas reached for the counter, steadying himself. I've shown up every day. I know. I've washed dishes, wiped tables, taken orders. I've memorized her favorite sandwich. I know which sticker book she hides under the napkin drawer. I know what song makes her dance with her eyes closed. Claire met his gaze again. I know, she whispered. That's what makes it worse. He wanted to yell, not at her, but at the universe that had made love this fragile. That had turned a father's efforts into a liability. That had made being present somehow not enough. I'm not asking to replace anyone, he said. I just want to be here, in whatever way you'll allow. Claire looked exhausted. Not in body, but in spirit, like someone carrying a suitcase they never packed but couldn't set down. "Don't say yes to her," she said. "Not yet. Not until you're sure you can stay." Lucas nodded slowly, and then, after a pause, he said, "I'm not leaving." Claire didn't respond. She just walked back into the kitchen, leaving him standing alone at the counter, with his hands in his pockets and the words still ringing in his ears. Dad. It had never sounded so small or so heavy. That night, Lucas stayed longer than usual. He helped clean up, dry dishes, wipe down the floor. Ellie had already gone to bed by the time he stepped out into the night. Claire stood in the doorway, arms folded. "Sunday breakfast?" she asked. Lucas nodded. "I'll bring orange juice." Her lips curved slightly, just barely. He didn't press it. He just walked to his car, the cool air wrapping around him like a blanket he didn't quite deserve. In the silence of his vehicle, he sat with both hands on the wheel, eyes closed, breath shallow. He knew what that word meant. He knew what it cost, and he knew, if he wasn't careful, it could break her. But he also knew if he did this right, it could make her whole. Lucas arrived later than usual, not because he'd forgotten or hesitated, but because, for the first time, he'd stopped downtown at the local courthouse, in a building that smelled of old wood and faint bleach, where everything echoed too much and people looked at you like they already knew your story. He didn't bring a lawyer. He didn't want this to feel like business. He just asked for the forms. He didn't even fill them out at first, just held them in his hands for a while, white pages that carried more weight than most boardroom contracts, because these weren't about stock or control, they were about permission, custody. Lucas stood in the kitchen of the diner holding the folder, unsure how to begin. Claire was pouring coffee. Ellie was coloring on the booth cushion with a glitter pen. It was a normal Tuesday, cool, gray, unremarkable. But he knew once the folder opened, nothing would stay normal. Claire finally looked up, brow furrowing when she saw his expression. "You okay?" He nodded, then gently set the folder on the counter between them. Claire didn't open it. She just stared at it like it might explode. "I want to do this right," Lucas said softly. "Not just show up. Not just play the role. I want it official." Claire didn't speak. "I'm not here for custody in the way courts usually think of it," he continued. "I'm not taking her. I'm not trying to win something. I just want to be listed, on paper, as someone who has a right to show up, someone who never stops showing up." Still, she said nothing. Lucas pressed on. "I know what that word meant when she said it. I also know what it cost you to hear it. So I'm putting it in your hands." He slid the folder across the counter. "No pressure, no deadline, but I need you to know that this isn't temporary. Not to me." Claire's hands remained at her sides. Her shoulders were tight. Her voice, when it finally came, was barely above a whisper. "You think paper makes it real?" "No," Lucas said. "Being here makes it real, but paper protects it." She looked at him then, and for the first time, her eyes weren't just skeptical. They were afraid. "I filled those forms out once," she said, "a long time ago. They told me I had to if I wanted help, government help, medical help, but they didn't explain what I was signing away." Lucas listened. "I had no job, no insurance, no one to vouch for me, so I signed. And for a while, someone else had the right to tell me how to raise her. A man in an office with a clipboard." Her jaw tightened. "I got it all back eventually. Took months, took money I didn't have. But I promised myself never again. Never again would I let anyone else hold the pen when it came to her life. Lucas nodded slowly. And now I'm asking you to hand me that pen. Claire looked at the folder, still unopened, still ominous. I'm not that man, he said, but I know trust isn't a sentence. It's a series of days, of decisions, of truths spoken, even when they're hard. Ellie hummed softly in the background, oblivious, drawing a castle, naming it Fair Hollow Kingdom, saying something about a dragon who used to be mean but now guarded the gates. Lucas didn't speak again. He just stood there, still, waiting. Claire finally reached for the folder. She opened it. Inside were the custody documents, partially filled. His name. Her name. Ellie's name. Claire flipped through them, slowly. When she reached the page where both parents had to sign acknowledgement of paternity, she paused. You could have just disappeared, she said, and no one would have chased you. I almost did, Lucas admitted, but she called me Dad. Claire closed the folder. She didn't hand it back. Instead, she walked to the office in the back, folder in hand, and shut the door behind her. Lucas didn't follow. He walked to Ellie's booth instead. What's the dragon's name? He asked. Ellie looked up. Benny, but he used to be angry. Why was he angry? Because no one believed he was good? Lucas smiled softly. And now he's part of the team. Lucas glanced toward the office door. He nodded. That's good to hear. An hour passed before Claire emerged. She wasn't crying. She wasn't smiling either. She held the folder like it had changed temperature. I read every word, she said. I expected you to, Lucas replied. I'm not ready to sign today. That's okay. She placed the folder in the drawer beneath the register. But I didn't throw it away. Lucas exhaled. Not relief, not victory, just breath. That evening, as he was about to leave, Claire stopped him. Lucas, he turned. I believe you mean it, she said. But meaning it today isn't enough. I'll be here tomorrow. She nodded once, I know, and that was the promise that mattered most. The stairs creaked more than he expected. Lucas had never seen them before, tucked behind a narrow door next to the storage shelves. Claire had never mentioned the apartment above the diner, and he'd never asked. It always felt like a boundary, like that door separated here from not yet. But that afternoon, as he was cleaning up after lunch, Claire had said it without ceremony. You want to come upstairs for a minute? She didn't explain, didn't smile, just asked. He said yes before he even thought about it. Now, he followed her up the tight wooden staircase, holding the railing because it tilted slightly to the left. Everything about the steps felt lived in, not broken, just tired in a way that spoke of years of use. At the top, Claire pushed open a blue-painted door. The apartment smelled like lemon soap and warm bread. The ceilings were low, the walls a faded cream. There were handmade curtains, a couch with a colorful quilt thrown across the back, a bookshelf packed with children's books and cookbooks and old magazines. The floors were uneven. The kitchen was barely more than a counter and a sink, but it was beautiful. It was real. Claire slipped off her shoes by the door. Lucas did the same. This is home, she said, almost as if apologizing. Lucas looked around. It's perfect. Claire walked to the stove and poured 2 mugs of coffee, handing him one. He took it, grateful for something to hold. Ellie was napping in the back room, she said. Lucas nodded and sat on the couch when she gestured toward it. They didn't speak for a while. Claire finally broke the silence. I didn't mean to stay in Fair Hollow this long. Lucas took a sip. What happened? She exhaled through her nose. The car broke down. I had 2 suitcases and a baby, and the woman who ran this place back then offered me a job. I said it would only be for a few months. That was 6 years ago. Lucas looked around again. You made it yours. I made it hers, she corrected. She walked over to a wall covered in Ellie's drawings. Some were framed. Most were taped up with crooked edges and glitter glue. She's never asked for much, Claire said. Never once begged for a bigger room or a yard. Just wanted to be near me. Lucas watched her fingers trail across a drawing of a rocket ship with 3 stick figures inside. I didn't know what I was doing, she said softly. I still don't, half the time. I think that means you're doing it right. Claire smiled faintly. She sat down on the other end of the couch, folding her legs under her. When I found out I was pregnant, she said, I didn't tell anyone, not even my sister. Lucas's breath caught. Claire looked at him. I didn't know how to tell you, or if I even should. You were halfway out the door already into that life you were building, and I didn't want to beg you to stay for something you didn't ask for. He nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the mug in his hands. You could have, he whispered. Claire looked away. Maybe, but I think I was afraid you'd stay and resent me, and I didn't want Ellie to grow up with someone who regretted being part of her life. Lucas rubbed his thumb along the handle of the mug. I wouldn't have. Claire looked at him again. You say that now. I mean it. She studied him for a long moment. I believe you do, she said. But back then, we were both so young. You loved your work more than anything. You loved the idea of control, of structure. Being a father, that would have scared you. Lucas didn't argue. It would have. Still, something in him ached to rewrite the past. I'm not that man anymore, he said. Claire nodded once. I see that. Silence fell again. It wasn't heavy, just full. Lucas stood and walked over to the bookshelf, scanning the titles. You still read the ones I gave you? He said, pulling out a weathered paperback with his handwriting on the inside cover. Claire smiled. It's one of my favorites. He ran his hand along the spine. I used to wonder if you kept anything. I kept everything that mattered, she said quietly. Lucas turned. She was watching him, not guarded, not testing, just open, vulnerable in a way he hadn't seen before. He walked back to the couch and sat down again, this time closer, not touching, just nearer. Do you ever think, he asked slowly, what might have happened if I stayed? Claire didn't answer right away. Then, sometimes. But then I look at Ellie, and I think maybe we ended up exactly where we needed to be, even if the path was cruel. Lucas nodded. The truth of it sat between them. A knock at the door broke the moment. It was Ellie, barefoot, rubbing her eyes. Mommy, she asked. Voice small. Is it morning? Claire smiled. Not yet, baby. Ellie patted over and crawled into her mother's lap, then looked at Lucas. Are you staying for dinner? She asked. Lucas glanced at Claire. She gave the tiniest nod. If that's okay, he said. Ellie clapped once, then leaned into her mom. Spaghetti night, she declared. Claire stood, balancing Ellie on her hip. Lucas offered to help, and for the first time, Claire didn't hesitate. She handed him the colander. He took it like it was made of glass, in that cramped little kitchen. Lucas grated cheese while Claire stirred sauce, and Ellie sang off key about meatballs and the moon. They set the table together, laughed over spilled salt, and burned the first batch of garlic bread. But no one cared. Dinner was loud, messy, honest. Afterward, as Ellie drifted off on the couch under the quilt, Lucas helped with dishes. The radio played something soft in the background. Claire washed. He dried. Their hands brushed once. She didn't pull away. He looked at her, and this time, he let the silence speak. Not a question, not a promise, just presence. When he left that night, the stars were low and the street was quiet. Claire stood at the top of the stairs, barefoot, arms folded, not saying goodbye, just watching. He didn't need words. She had opened her world, and for Lucas, that meant more than any signature on a page. It wasn't planned. There were no flowers, no candlelight, no big gestures or velvet boxes. It happened on a Tuesday night, just after closing. The diner was quiet, chairs stacked on tables, the last dish washed, and the radio playing a soft old song that nobody knew the name of. Claire was wiping down the counter with slow, even strokes. Lucas was refilling the salt shakers like he always did without being asked. The overhead lights buzzed faintly. Outside, the street was wrapped in winter fog. Lucas turned, salt shaker in hand, and looked at her like he'd just realized something that had been sitting in him for a while. "Can I ask you something?" Claire looked up. "You usually don't ask." He gave her a sheepish smile. "This one matters." She set the rag down. Lucas walked around the counter and leaned against it, folding his arms, not defensive, just thoughtful. "I've been thinking," he said slowly, "about what it means to stay." Claire watched him, her eyes calm but unreadable. "I used to think staying was about location, geography, choosing one zip code over another, but it's not that, not really." He paused. "It's about waking up and knowing who you want to make breakfast for, who you'd shovel snow with, who you'd listen to in silence when they've had a bad day and don't want to talk about it." Claire tilted her head slightly, something soft creeping into her features. "I want to be part of that," Lucas said. "Not just on weekends, not just in emergencies, every day." She took a step back, a reflex more than a choice. "I'm not asking for some fairy tale ending," he continued. "I know the past doesn't disappear just because we want it to, but I'm asking if we can build something new, steady, ours." Claire crossed her arms. "Are you saying you want to move here?" Lucas nodded. "I already started looking. There's a house down by the old mill. It's small, but the backyard is big. Ellie could plant those sunflowers she keeps talking about." Claire looked away. "Lucas," he didn't interrupt. "I don't need saving," she said quietly. "I've been doing this alone for a long time. I know. I'm not broken. I never said you were." She met his gaze again. "Then why now? Why all of this?" He took a breath. "Because I miss being with you. Because I love being her dad. Because every day I'm here feels more honest than every day I've spent trying to prove something in a city that doesn't even know my middle name." Claire blinked. Silence sat between them. Then she walked over to the window, wiping her hands on her apron, staring out at the fog. "Do you know what I thought about the night I found out I was pregnant?" He didn't answer. "I thought about a house, not a mansion, just a house with warm floors and chipped mugs. I thought about reading stories out loud in bad voices, about someone to argue with about groceries and laugh with when everything goes wrong. She turned back to him, and for a while, I thought maybe that person could have been you. But when you left, I had to become that for myself. Lucas nodded, and you did. I did, she said, voice taut. He stepped closer. I'm not asking to take that from you. I'm asking to share it. She looked at him, really looked, and something deep inside her shifted. She didn't move, didn't smile, but her shoulders dropped just a little. He took it as permission to keep going. I don't want to just be part of Ellie's life. I want to build something with you. No pressure, no timeline, just truth. Claire reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a folded paper. She handed it to him. He unfolded it. It was one of Ellie's drawings. A house, 3 stick figures, the words, "My family," scrawled in green crayon above. She drew that last week, Claire said. Didn't show it to either of us, just taped it to the back of her closet. Lucas touched the drawing like it might vanish. I want that too, he whispered. Claire exhaled. I believe you, she said, but I need time. He nodded. You have all of it. Then something happened, something small, but seismic. Claire stepped forward and touched his chest lightly with her fingertips. A gesture, not a promise, but it was enough. That night, they walked out of the diner side by side, not holding hands, not making declarations, just walking. When they reached Lucas's car, he turned to her one last time. If this is something, he said, it's the most real thing I've ever known. She nodded, eyes glistening. Then, let's treat it like it matters. He leaned in and kissed her forehead soft, brief, reverent, no fireworks, just peace. He drove home with the drawing on the passenger seat, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel alone on the road. It had been exactly 93 days since Lucas first stepped into the Driftwood Diner. Not that anyone was counting out loud, but Ellie was. She marked it on the calendar behind the kitchen door, a small red circle around every day he showed up. No one told her to. She just did it, instinctively, as if, in her heart, she knew consistency needed witnesses. On the 93rd day, something changed. It wasn't loud, no announcements, no grand declarations, just a simple moment. Claire was replanting basil in a windowsill pot. Lucas was fixing the squeaky hinge on the front door. Ellie was coloring, as always, on the linoleum floor near the booth with the cracked cushion. Then Ellie looked up and said, I think we should frame it. Frame what? Bug, Claire asked. Ellie pointed toward the wall beside the booth, her favorite booth. Lucas followed her finger. Taped unevenly to the wall was a new drawing, bigger than the others. It was a house, again, a little crooked. The garden was blooming, overflowing with yellow and blue scribbles. But it was the people that stopped Lucas. There were 3 of them, one tall man with brown hair, one woman with a braid, one little girl with bright shoes, and this time they were all holding hands above them in careful crayon strokes. We're staying. Lucas's chest ached in the best way. Claire stood beside him, silent. Ellie looked between them. It's the best one yet. Claire knelt and ran a hand across Ellie's back. It really is. Can we put it in a real frame? Like the fancy kind, Lucas smiled. I'll find one today, that afternoon. He did just that. Not online, not overnight shipped. He went to the local thrift store and found one that was a little worn, a little scratched, but still solid like the diner. Like all of them. He brought it back and framed the drawing himself. When he hung it on the wall above the booth, Ellie clapped, her feet swinging as she sat cross-legged on the cushion. "It's official now," she said, and maybe it was. Not because of the frame, or the drawing, or the fact that Lucas had signed a lease on the small house near the old mill that very morning. It was official because the story had changed, and they had changed with it. That evening, Claire cooked dinner upstairs her grandmother's stew recipe. Lucas peeled potatoes at the counter while Ellie practiced spelling words at the table. They talked about school, about stories, about whether clouds ever got tired. When it grew quiet, Claire looked over. "I saw the deed," she said. Lucas paused, holding a peeler. "The house." She nodded. "Your name's on it." He dried his hands and walked over. "It's not far," he said. 2 blocks, close enough to hear the bell over the diner door. Claire stirred the pot slowly. "You sure? I've never been more sure of anything." She didn't respond right away. "Then we'll still take things slow." He smiled. "I know." They ate dinner together. Ellie insisted they hold hands before the first bite. No one questioned it. Afterward, Lucas tucked Ellie in. It had become a habit. She had 2 storybooks, one for him, one for Claire. They took turns reading. Ellie always interrupted with questions. She always insisted on the same ending line. And they stayed. That's the most important part. That night, after the lights were out, Lucas lingered in the hallway. Claire joined him a few minutes later, leaning against the door frame. "She dreams better when you're here," she said quietly. Lucas looked down the hall. "So do I." They walked back to the couch, sat without turning on the TV. There were still things unsaid, still scars that would never fully fade. But there was peace. Claire turned toward him. "I told Ellie today," she said. "I told her the truth, that you didn't leave because you didn't love her, that you didn't know." Lucas listened, every word landing soft and sharp at once. She cried a little. Claire continued. "Then she asked if you were going to leave again." "What did you say?" "I told her no," Claire said, "because I believe you now." Lucas closed his eyes for a moment. "Thank you." Claire reached for his hand. For the first time, it wasn't cautious, it wasn't testing, it was hers, in his. Later that week, the town took notice. Old Joe, the trucker with the suspenders, passed by Lucas one morning and grunted. "Still here," Lucas nodded. "Still here." Joe tipped his cap and walked on. Mrs. Hartley from the fabric shop stopped Claire and offered her a casserole she accidentally made too much of. People didn't ask questions anymore. They just accepted. The drawing stayed on the wall. Ellie added a son above the house and a small dog in the corner. For someday, she said. Claire didn't argue. Lucas took a picture of the framed drawing and kept it in his wallet. For every day, he might need a reminder that love wasn't earned all at once. It was built, breath by breath, moment by moment. Weeks passed. The diner stayed full. The house began to feel like more than keys and furniture. And one night, as they sat outside on the porch under a sky full of stars, Claire leaned into Lucas and whispered, "You stayed." He kissed her temple and whispered back, "So did you." And inside, on the wall above the booth, the drawing never faded. It just became part of the place, like the laughter, like the mornings, like the quiet between them that no longer felt empty. It was home, at last, and always. What makes a family? Is it blood, paperwork, proximity? Or is it the quiet, relentless act of showing up day after day, even when it's hard? Lucas didn't arrive to save anyone. He came searching for silence, and instead found two hearts waiting for a truth they never expected to hear. Claire didn't need a hero. She needed someone who wouldn't leave when the lights turned off. And Ellie, sweet Ellie, didn't need the perfect dad. She just needed someone who'd sit beside her at the booth and remember how she liked her toast. Through every whisper of the past, every crack in trust, every unspoken fear, they built something, not flawless, but real. This story reminds us that some wounds don't need fixing, only witnessing. And sometimes the most powerful act of love is to stay. To anyone who's ever felt like they weren't enough, to anyone who's ever been left behind, to anyone still waiting at the window. This story was for you. If it moved your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to support more stories like this. Comment below. What does family mean to you? We'd love to hear. And don't forget to turn on the bell, because our next story, it might just change how you see the world.